the principal's daughter, threw a $100 bill on the floor and said, "Fetch," in front of the class. When I finally opened up and told her who I really was, she stammered, "Wait, you're the evaluator?" I stayed silent. That was 3 months ago. Yesterday, she deleted her Instagram and started community service in a janitor's uniform. It was the official evaluation day for Principal Powell when Mrs. Clark ambushed me in the hallway saying, "The AP history substitute called in sick. Could you cover it until lunch?" Before I could explain my real purpose, she'd shoved a lesson plan into my hands and vanished. Fine. What better way to evaluate a principal than experiencing his school firsthand? Room 237 reeked of cherry vape juice and entitlement. Then the principal's daughter Madison arrived, Starbucks in one hand, iPhone in the other. The class straightened like meerkats spotting their queen. She moved like her father's position was a red carpet rolled out specifically for her designer boots. Her eyes cataloged my outfit with surgical precision. The 3-year-old blazer, sensible flats, the coffee stain I'd failed to hide. Her smile spread like an oil spill, toxic and impossible to contain. The eye roll she performed deserved an Olympic medal. Another substitute? She announced to her court that subs were just failed teachers collecting participation trophies. The laughter that followed felt rehearsed, obligatory. Her friends knew their roles. When I introduced myself as Ms. Xiao, she lit up with the kind of glee usually reserved for cats who'd cornered mice. Xiao? Like the Chinese restaurant on 5th? Did I deliver on weekends? Her friend Tyler howled as if she'd invented comedy. My fingers pressed into the attendance sheet, right over her father's evaluation form tucked beneath. I tried to remind myself, deep breaths. Channel the patience of a real substitute who needed this job. Madison's confidence inflated with each passing minute. She pulled out her phone, narrating my appearance to her Instagram story. The substitute teacher fashion police was in session apparently. Target clearance rack, Goodwill. She zoomed in on my shoes, speculating about which Payless was having a going out of business sale. When I asked her to put the phone away, she actually laughed. Not a chuckle, a full-throated laugh that said she'd eaten bigger challenges for breakfast. The stories poured out. Ms. Garcia, who'd tried to give her detention, now teaches kindergartners finger painting. Mr. Birch, who'd failed her for plagiarizing an essay, mysteriously transferred mid-semester. Each tale made her grow taller, made my blazer feel shabbier. Then came the coffee incident. She hip-checked my desk while gesturing dramatically about her trip to the mall. My coffee mug exploded across my papers in a brown tsunami. Her oops was about as sincere as a politician's promise. She filmed me scrambling for paper towels, narrating about how substitutes were basically janitors with teaching licenses. The $100 bill materialized from her wallet like a magic trick designed to humiliate. She waved it slowly, explaining how this single bill represented 10 hours of substitute pay. Maybe 12, if the district was feeling stingy. The bill fluttered to the floor between us. "Fetch," she commanded. The word hung in the air like a challenge. She explained with the patience of someone training a particularly stupid dog that I could pick up the money or she could tell Daddy I was incompetent. My choice. I bent down, picked up the bill, watched her victory smile bloom. That's when she hopped onto my desk, boots leaving black scuffs on the wood. She called for a class vote on whether I should leave immediately and spare everyone the secondhand embarrassment. Hands rose. Not all, but enough. Democracy in action, she declared, live streaming the whole thing. She started listing my failures. The cheap clothes, the pushover attitude, the obvious desperation of someone clinging to the bottom rung of education. Her father, she explained, was restructuring next year. But maybe if I learned my place, stayed quiet, accepted that some people were meant to serve while others led. The intercom saved her from finishing as the principal said, "Ms. Xiao to the principal's office, immediately." Madison's grin could have powered a small city. She graciously offered to put in a good word, maybe help me keep my sub-license if I apologized properly. I gathered my things, including the coffee-soaked evaluation folder, with its official Board of Education seal now clearly visible. Madison's eyes tracked the movement, some primitive part of her brain registering danger. I mentioned, almost casually, that her father was expecting me. We had a meeting scheduled, his performance evaluation. The Board of Education was very interested in how principals maintained discipline and professional standards. The color drained from her face so fast I worried she might faint. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish discovering air. I thanked her for the visceral demonstration of power dynamics and corruption. The board loved specific examples. The $100 bill would make excellent evidence. Her friends had suddenly discovered fascinating things in their textbooks. She stammered about jokes, about context, about how everyone knew she didn't really mean it. The bell interrupted her. I told her, "Better hurry to next period. Your father is strict about tardiness, isn't he?" Then I left. The last sound before the door closed was Madison's shriek about college recommendations, about transcripts, about how Daddy had promised if she got one more complaint. But I was already walking toward Principal Powell's office, heels clicking with new purpose. I walked through the empty hallway, my footsteps echoing off the linoleum. The evaluation folder felt heavier with each step, its coffee-stained edges a reminder of Madison's performance. Teachers peeked out from doorways as I passed, their expressions shifting from curiosity to recognition, to something that looked like hope. Principal Powell's office door stood open. He sat behind his mahogany desk, reviewing what appeared to be student transcripts. His head snapped up at my approach, and I watched his face transform in real time. Confusion melted into recognition, which hardened into cautious professionalism. He'd clearly read the morning's email from the board. I entered without knocking, placing the stained folder directly on his desk. His eyes tracked the movement, lingering on the coffee damage. His smile stretched across his face, but it never reached his eyes. Powell stood, extending his hand in a gesture that felt more like a peace offering than a greeting. His grip was firm but brief. He gestured to the leather chair across from his desk, then settled back into his own seat. His coffee mug paused halfway to his lips as he noticed the board's seal on my folder. The silence stretched between us. Powell's fingers drummed against his desk, a nervous rhythm that betrayed his composed exterior. He cleared his throat, launching into an explanation about the morning's unfortunate mix-up. His words tumbled out faster as he spoke, describing how substitute shortages created impossible situations, how Mrs. Clark had simply been trying to ensure students received instruction. His phone buzzed on the desk. Then again and again, Madison's name flashed on the screen with each notification. Powell's jaw tightened as he silenced the device, but the damage was done. I'd already seen the preview of her first message. "Dad emergency, the evaluator was in my class." I pulled out my notepad, making a show of reviewing my morning observations. Powell's smile grew more strained with each passing second. He loosened his tie, a gesture that seemed unconscious until he caught himself and smoothed it back down. A knock interrupted the mounting tension. Janet, his secretary, entered with an apologetic expression. She informed Powell that 3 teachers had requested to speak with Ms. Xiao during their free periods. She handed him a list of names, and I watched his face carefully as he read. His knuckles whitened as he gripped the paper. Powell faced a choice: restrict my access and appear defensive, or cooperate fully and risk what his teachers might reveal. His internal calculation played out across his features. Finally, he forced another smile and assured me I'd have complete access to anyone I wished to interview. He leaned back, adopting a conversational tone. He spoke about the unique challenges of working with privileged students, how their advantages sometimes created behavioral issues. Madison, he confided, struggled with boundaries. The admission felt calculated, an attempt to control the narrative before I could form my own conclusions. I thanked him for his transparency and excused myself to begin teacher interviews. The faculty lounge buzzed with activity when I entered, but conversations died mid-sentence. Teachers suddenly found their gradebooks fascinating. Papers shuffled, coffee was stirred with unusual intensity. One teacher, Ms. Williams, caught my eye as she gathered her materials. Something passed between us, a silent acknowledgement. She brushed past me on her way out, and I felt something pressed into my hand, a folded note. I waited 5 minutes before following the note's instructions to the supply closet. Williams stood among boxes of printer paper and cleaning supplies, wringing her hands. She glanced at the door repeatedly as she spoke in hushed tones about Madison's behavior. The stories tumbled out: destroyed assignments blamed on other students, verbal harassment that went unreported, a culture of fear that permeated the entire school. Williams explained how complaints disappeared, how teachers who spoke up found themselves with mysteriously difficult schedules or transferred to less desirable positions. She'd learned to document everything privately, keeping her own records that never made it into official files. The lunch bell rang, sending us both back to our respective duties. I found Powell already waiting in the cafeteria, having claimed the seat beside mine before I could choose my own table. He steered our conversation toward his innovative fundraising programs, his community partnerships, his vision for educational excellence. What's really going on with this setup feels oddly convenient. Mrs. Xiao just happens to get pushed into Madison's class right when she's there to evaluate Powell. All while Madison watched from across the room, her usual crowd conspicuously absent. Mrs. Clark appeared at my elbow as Powell excused himself for a phone call. Her apology came in rushed whispers. She'd known exactly who I was that morning, but had panicked when the substitute called in sick. An unattended AP class during an evaluation would have reflected poorly on the school, on Powell. The fear in her voice when she mentioned his name told me more than her words ever could. That evening, I spread Madison's official file across my hotel room desk. 2 minor infractions over 3 years, one for dress code, another for tardiness. Yet during my interviews, teacher after teacher had referenced previous incidents and patterns of behavior. The disconnect was staggering. My laptop chimed with a new email. No sender name, just a timestamp. The message was brief. Check why Mr. Garcia really transferred. Not the first evaluation Powell survived. I stared at the screen, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to form. Garcia's name had surfaced multiple times throughout the day, always accompanied by meaningful looks and unfinished sentences. Tomorrow, I'd need to dig deeper. The next morning arrived with Powell's rearranged interview schedule. My carefully planned teacher meetings had been shuffled, replaced with a parade of parent volunteers who sang his praises. Each one mentioned his accessibility, his fundraising success, his dedication to excellence. The script felt rehearsed. Between parent testimonials, I accessed Garcia's transfer records. Personal reasons was listed as her motivation for leaving mid-year, but the timeline was suspicious. A spike in Madison-related incident reports had occurred in the weeks before Garcia's departure, then abruptly stopped. The last report was dated exactly 1 week before her transfer request. Powell's next move was assigning Madison as my student guide for the remainder of my visit. She appeared at my side with a practiced smile, all traces of yesterday's panic carefully hidden. She'd escort me between interviews, ensure I didn't get lost, help me understand the school's complex layout. Her real purpose was transparent. The school's Wi-Fi developed mysterious connectivity issues whenever I attempted to access shared drives. Error messages popped up repeatedly, forcing me to switch to cellular data. Madison watched my frustration with poorly concealed satisfaction. Assistant Superintendent Blake joined me for coffee during a break. He mentioned, almost casually, how Powell's annual golf fundraiser had broken records this year. The community support was unprecedented. Hard to find that kind of backing, he mused, stirring sugar into his cup. The message was clear. I excused myself early, driving across town to Garcia's new school. She taught 5th grade now, a dramatic shift from high school AP English. The woman who greeted me in her classroom looked years younger than her personnel file suggested, as if leaving Powell's school had lifted an invisible weight. Garcia's story unfolded slowly. She'd kept a private journal documenting Madison's escalating behavior and Powell's responses. Every incident, every dismissed complaint, every conversation where she'd been told to be more understanding. The final straw had been a parent conference where Powell had strongly suggested she reconsider Madison's failing grade. I was told pursuing it would hurt my career, Garcia said, her voice steady but her hands trembling, that I was being inflexible, that I didn't understand the bigger picture. The transfer was presented as an opportunity, but we both know what it really was. I returned to find 3 more teachers waiting to speak with me. Each one mentioned Madison during their interviews, then immediately changed subjects when they noticed the recording device. Their glances were nervous, calculating. They wanted to tell the truth but feared the consequences. The pattern in Madison's disciplinary record became clearer with each interview. Serious behavioral issues resulted in verbal warnings, while other students received detention for minor dress code violations. The disparity was stark and systemic. Tyler approached me after school, glancing around nervously. His conscience was bothering him, he admitted. The bullying, the cruelty, it wasn't who he wanted to be. But Powell wrote his college recommendation letters. One word from the principal could derail his future. The conflict played out across his young face. Mr. Chen, the head janitor, emptied my trash can with deliberate slowness. He mentioned, voice casual, that some things never made it into official reports. His eyes flicked meaningfully to a security camera in the corner, its lens covered with black tape. Maintenance issue, he said with a shrug that suggested otherwise. Madison's next attempt at intimidation came in the parking lot. She'd called to have my rental car towed for improper parking, despite my valid visitor's pass. Janet intercepted me with a warning, suggesting I move my car immediately. The secretary's small act of defiance spoke volumes. My final interview of the day was with Ms. Williams again, this time officially. She sat across from me in the conference room, hands folded carefully on the table. She spoke in measured tones about school climate, about professional development, about Powell's leadership style. But when I asked about documentation, she paused. I keep my own files, she admitted finally. Personal records, just in case. The weight of those 3 words hung between us. Williams had learned to protect herself in a system that wouldn't protect her. The hotel breakfast buffet was nearly empty when Sarah Powell materialized beside my table, carrying a plate of fruit and wearing a smile that didn't quite mask her purpose. She settled into the chair across from me without invitation, launching into pleasantries about the weather and the quality of the hotel's coffee. Her manicured fingers drummed against the table as she mentioned how challenging teenage daughters could be, how Madison was going through a difficult phase. The way she casually dropped names of board members she knew personally made her intentions crystal clear. I recognized the technique immediately. Soft intimidation wrapped in maternal concern. Sarah's eyes never left my face as she expressed sympathy for the pressures of evaluation work, how exhausting it must be to travel constantly, to judge situations without full context. She reached for her phone, scrolling through photos of charity galas where she stood beside influential district officials. Each image was a reminder of the Powell family's reach. My professional mask remained firmly in place as I thanked her for breakfast company and excused myself. The encounter confirmed what I'd suspected. The Powells were mobilizing their network. Back in my room, I documented the interaction in my notes, adding it to the growing pattern of interference. Chen's wife caught me in the hotel lobby that afternoon, her nervous energy palpable. She explained how their daughter had graduated the previous year, but still refused to discuss her senior year experience. The woman's hands shook as she described finding her daughter's deleted social media accounts, the therapy sessions that followed, the way Madison's name still made her daughter flinch. The story emerged in fragments, each detail painting a clearer picture of systematic harassment that went far beyond typical teenage cruelty. Powell's next attempt at control came through Janet, who appeared at my hotel room door looking uncomfortable. She'd been asked to shadow my interviews, to take her own notes for Powell's review, but instead of compliance, Janet surprised me. She was tired of certain patterns, she admitted, glancing down the hallway as if Powell might materialize. With only 2 years until retirement, she'd reached her limit of enabling behavior she knew was wrong. The following morning, I arrived early to photograph attendance records. The patterns jumped out immediately. Madison's strategic absences on major test days, followed by makeup exams with noticeably different questions. The grade books told their own story of favoritism, with Madison's scores showing suspicious improvements after parent conferences. District HR responded to my inquiry about evaluation parameters with bureaucratic precision. They confirmed that unsubstantiated student behavioral claims weren't typically included unless they demonstrably impacted the learning environment. The careful wording suggested they were already anticipating Powell's defense strategy. The parent coffee group that afternoon included 3 mothers who'd clearly coordinated their attendance. They shared stories of their daughters' experiences with Madison, careful to frame them as concerns about school climate rather than direct accusations. One mother mentioned considering private school, despite the financial strain, just to escape the toxic environment Madison created. That evening, my usual jogging route took me past the hotel parking lot where I noticed Madison's distinctive car circling slowly. She made 3 passes, her face illuminated by her phone screen, before finally driving away. The surveillance attempt was clumsy but unsettling. Coach Martinez proved unexpectedly forthcoming during his interview. He revealed that the previous vice principal who'd attempted to address Madison's behavior had been reassigned to a district office special project within weeks. The coach's bitter laugh suggested the reassignment was anything but voluntary. Sarah Powell's lunch invitation arrived via Janet, who delivered it with an apologetic expression. I declined politely, citing scheduling conflicts. Word of my refusal spread quickly through the staff, earning surprised looks and subtle nods of approval. Apparently, I was the first evaluator to resist the Powell charm offensive. Mrs. Clark's rushed confession about knowing who I was raises so many questions. Why did she pretend not to recognize me if she was just worried about the evaluation? There's something deeper here than just covering for a missing substitute. The board's email reminder about my 72-hour deadline arrived with perfect timing, standard procedure, but clearly meant to add pressure. I was running out of time to build a case that would stick. Williams made her decision that evening, arriving at my hotel with a cardboard box. Inside were years of documentation, Madison's grade improvements after parent conferences, detailed notes about administrative guidance regarding grading flexibility. The pattern of intervention was undeniable. Each incident was small enough to seem reasonable in isolation, but together they painted a picture of systematic manipulation. The school board meeting that night offered an unexpected glimpse into Powell's state of mind. He worked the room with his usual confidence, but sweat soaked through his shirt despite the air conditioning. Madison's absence was conspicuous, the first time she'd missed a public event where her father was performing. Powell intercepted me in the parking lot afterward, his friendly mask slipping slightly. He wanted to clarify any misunderstandings about his daughter, explaining that teenagers were naturally dramatic, that social media amplified every small conflict. His rehearsed speech about modern parenting challenges felt hollow against the weight of documentation I'd accumulated. 2 more teachers requested off-record conversations, their fear of retaliation warring with their need to be heard. They spoke in careful circles, never quite naming Madison directly, but ensuring I understood the scope of the problem. Their relief at finally being able to share their experiences was palpable. My investigation into Madison's previous school revealed she'd been asked to leave for incompatibility with school culture, administrative code for behavior issues too problematic to ignore, but not severe enough for expulsion. Notably, no official infractions had transferred with her records. Powell's support base became clearer through interviews. Parents who benefited from his flexible policies sang his praises, as did boosters who appreciated his fundraising prowess. His power came not from fear, but from mutual benefit. He gave them what they wanted, and they protected him in return. The PTA president's revelation came with a flash drive containing recorded meetings. The audio revealed how concerns about Madison were consistently redirected to general bullying prevention initiatives, never addressing the specific source. Powell's skill at controlling narratives was impressive in its subtlety. Janet provided crucial context during our coffee meeting. Powell wasn't overtly corrupt, she explained, but selectively blind. He genuinely believed he was helping Madison by shielding her from consequences. Unable to see how his protection had created a monster, his love had become enabling, his protection had become corruption. The Chen family's full story emerged over dinner. Their daughter had internalized Madison's treatment to the point where it affected her college applications. She'd convinced herself she wasn't good enough for top schools, that Madison's assessments of her worth were accurate. The psychological damage extended far beyond the school walls. Sarah Sarah Powell's attempt at bribery came wrapped in charity. She offered to donate to any organization of my choice as thanks for my hard work. The implication was clear. Accept the donation and soften the evaluation. I declined with professional courtesy, documenting the interaction immediately. Powell contradicted himself during a hallway encounter, forgetting his earlier claim about never interfering with grades. Madison, standing nearby, actually rolled her eyes at her father's obvious lie. Even she recognized his inability to keep his stories straight. Multiple teachers confirmed similar experiences through carefully legal language. They'd learned to speak in code, to imply without accusing, to protect themselves while still conveying truth. The culture of fear was pervasive but subtle. Word of my investigation's focus had spread through administrative circles. Powell's usual allies began distancing themselves, their support suddenly lukewarm. Self-preservation trumped loyalty when accountability loomed. The custodial staff mentioned that Powell had ordered them to remove several boxes of files the night before my arrival, the first time in 3 years he'd cleaned out old records. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Parents began connecting through whisper networks, sharing stories they'd never reported officially. The collective weight of their experiences created momentum for change that had been building for years. Confronted at a gas station, Powell's mask slipped completely. He insisted he was protecting his daughter from overreacting adults who didn't understand teenage dynamics. His self-justification revealed a man who'd convinced himself that his enabling was love. Teachers who'd remained silent began approaching younger colleagues with apologies. They should have done more, they admitted, should have stood up sooner. The guilt of their complicity weighed heavily now that change seemed possible. Madison's college counselor revealed irregularities in her recommendation letters, sections Powell had insisted on editing that inflated her accomplishments and minimized disciplinary issues. Even her college applications were built on manufactured narratives. Garcia's testimony revealed the crucial truth. Madison's behavior had escalated precisely because consequences never materialized. She'd been enabled rather than malicious, taught through experience that rules didn't apply to her. The fault lay more with a system that protected her than with a teenager who exploited it. I spent hours ensuring cooperating teachers wouldn't be identified in my report, using aggregate data to show patterns without exposing individuals. Their courage deserved protection. Support staff began timing their regular duties to assist my investigation, emptying trash when I needed private conversations, scheduling maintenance during crucial interviews. Their subtle support spoke volumes about their desire for change. Madison's attempt to spread rumors about me through group chats backfired spectacularly. Screenshots surfaced showing her contradictions, her lies about our interactions. Her own peers were beginning to see through her carefully constructed image. Board member Thompson's daughter, a lawyer, explained the potential legal liability the district faced. The documented harassment created exposure to lawsuits that could drain resources for years. Financial self-interest might succeed where moral arguments had failed. Local parent Facebook groups buzzed with speculation about the evaluation. I maintained professional silence, neither confirming nor denying the rumors that swirled. The community was ready for change, even if they didn't yet know what form it would take. Previous evaluation reports showed Powell had barely passed twice before, with similar concerns noted in vague, careful language. He'd survived by promising improvements that never materialized, by leveraging his fundraising success against his failures. With 24 hours remaining, I faced the challenge of every evaluator, weighing what could be proven against what everyone knew to be true. Legal obligations battled ethical ones as I compiled my findings. Sarah Powell's wine-fueled confession at book club reached me through 3 different sources. She knew Madison needed help, but feared the stigma of admitting her daughter's problems. The family's dysfunction ran deeper than simple enabling. The evaluation's importance crystallized as I reviewed my notes. This wasn't just about Powell or Madison. It was about whether accountability existed in the district at all. If Powell survived this evaluation, it would send a clear message that connections mattered more than conduct. Madison's tantrum in the hallway about ruined futures provided an opportunity to model professional behavior. I de-escalated calmly, showing surrounding students an alternative to Powell's enabling approach. Several teachers later mentioned how impressed they were by my refusal to engage with her dramatics. The superintendent could no longer claim ignorance once my documented patterns were presented formally. The weight of evidence would force action or reveal complicity. Either outcome would change the district's dynamics. 7 teachers ultimately signed statements about climate issues, carefully worded to avoid naming Madison directly, while making the source of problems clear. Their coordinated action represented years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. Powell's contract renewal discussion was tabled pending my evaluation results, the first time in his tenure that his position had been questioned. The board's nervousness was palpable as they realized the extent of their potential liability. Madison's panic about college led to her first sign of accountability. She approached me privately, begging me to understand that everyone makes mistakes. The desperation in her voice suggested she finally grasped that consequences might actually reach her. Powell's lawyer friend advised him to prepare for multiple outcomes, a clear sign that even his inner circle recognized the seriousness of the situation. The careful legal maneuvering had begun in earnest. My evaluation report took shape over sleepless nights, balancing harsh truths with professional language. I recommended significant reforms and mandatory leadership coaching rather than termination, a measured response that acknowledged both the problems and the possibility of redemption. Teachers felt validated simply by having their experiences documented officially. Even without dramatic consequences, the acknowledgement of their struggles mattered deeply. Change might come slowly, but it would come. Parents who'd remained silent expressed relief that someone had finally said what they'd thought for years. Williams showing up with that box of documentation seems awfully convenient. Teachers keep perfect records of exactly what someone needs. The timing of Powell's file removal and this evidence appearing makes me wonder who's really orchestrating this investigation behind the scenes. The community was ready for change, had been ready, but needed an external catalyst to break the inertia of Powell's influence. My evaluation report took shape through careful documentation and measured language. The final draft recommended significant reforms with mandatory leadership coaching rather than termination, a response that acknowledged both the problems and possibility for redemption. The morning of the board meeting arrived with unexpected energy. Community members filled the auditorium seats an hour before the scheduled start time. Madison sat between her parents in the front row, her usual friend group noticeably absent. Her fingers twisted nervously in her lap as more people filed in. Powell presented his achievements with practiced confidence, highlighting fundraising records and test score improvements. His selective data data painted a picture of excellence that my report would soon contextualize. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the air conditioning as he noticed how many teachers had attended. Tyler's mother stood during public comment, her voice shaking as she described her son's moral struggles in the toxic environment. She explained how he'd come home crying after participating in Madison's cruelty, torn between peer pressure and his conscience. Other parents nodded in recognition. Board member Chen asked pointed questions that Powell couldn't deflect with his usual charm. Her daughter had graduated from Lincoln High, she revealed, and the stories she'd shared about certain students' unchecked behavior had been deeply concerning. Powell's attempts to redirect toward his innovative programs fell flat. I faced a critical decision about referencing Garcia's testimony. The patterns she'd documented were damning, but exposing her could invite retaliation. I chose to reference aggregate patterns without identifying individuals, maintaining professional ethics while ensuring the truth emerged. Madison stood unexpectedly, clutching a prepared statement. Her apology focused on learning from mistakes and growing as a person. She maintained eye contact with her father throughout, never once looking at the audience. Powell's jaw tightened with each word, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling. The prepared statement rang hollow against the documented patterns of behavior. Madison's voice cracked as she mentioned wanting to be better, but the performance felt more like damage control than genuine remorse. Several teachers exchanged knowing glances. Sarah Powell followed with her own plea for second chances, the first public acknowledgement of any failures. Her designer suit couldn't hide the exhaustion in her eyes as she admitted they'd lost perspective on appropriate boundaries. The admission came too late for the families who'd already suffered. The board implemented mandatory leadership review protocols with independent student advocacy positions. These Powell protocols, as they became known, would ensure no principal could shield problem students from accountability. The vote was unanimous, even Powell's usual supporters recognizing the liability of continued inaction. Powell accepted enhanced oversight rather than face potential termination. The agreement included family counseling requirements and regular reviews of his decision-making processes. His relief at avoiding termination was tempered by the reality of constant scrutiny. Madison's parents decided she should take a gap year before college, with mandatory community service hours to demonstrate growth. The prestigious university that had accepted her would defer enrollment pending evidence of genuine change. Madison's Instagram account went dark that same evening. The district hired a new assistant principal specifically to handle student discipline independently from Powell. Ms. Williams smiled genuinely for the first time in months when the announcement was made. The position would report directly to the district, bypassing Powell's influence entirely. My evaluation became a model for addressing enabled misconduct without destroying careers. The focus on systemic reform, rather than punitive measures, created a framework other districts could adapt. Professional accountability had finally reached the Powell administration. 3 months later, Williams sent an update that validated the intervention's impact. Madison attended weekly therapy sessions and completed community service at the local youth center. Her interactions with younger students were closely supervised, but initial reports suggested genuine effort at change. Powell participated in mandatory leadership coaching, while every significant decision underwent review. The process was humbling for someone accustomed to unchecked authority, but he was slowly learning to separate parental protection from professional responsibility. His fundraising abilities remained valuable, just no longer sufficient to excuse other failures. Teachers reported gradual climate improvements, though changing established patterns took time. New students no longer arrived with warnings about certain untouchable classmates. The hallway dynamics shifted as students realized consequences applied equally to everyone. The Chen family's daughter sent a handwritten thank you note from her college dorm. She'd found her confidence again, realizing that Madison's assessments had never defined her worth. The note mentioned considering education as a career, wanting to create better environments than she'd experienced. Garcia was considering returning the following year, encouraged by the structural changes. The new oversight protocols would prevent the isolation she'd faced when reporting problems. Her potential return symbolized how accountability could restore faith in the system. The documentation I'd compiled served as evidence in 2 civil suits filed by former students. The district settled quietly, implementing additional training requirements for all administrators. Powell's personal assets remained protected, but his reputation would never fully recover. Madison's former friends distanced themselves once her protection disappeared. Tyler publicly apologized to students he'd helped torment, his genuine remorse earning cautious forgiveness from some. The social hierarchy that had enabled Madison's behavior crumbled without institutional support. Janet retired on schedule but spent her final months training her replacement on the new accountability procedures. She ensured the institutional memory of Powell's enablement wouldn't disappear with her departure. Her legacy was a system that protected students over administrators. Local parent groups continued meeting monthly to discuss school climate. The evaluation had catalyzed community engagement that extended beyond just Powell and Madison. Parents felt empowered to demand better from their schools. The $100 bill from Madison's classroom performance became a symbol in district training materials. The image of privilege attempting to humiliate authority resonated with educators facing similar dynamics. Madison's moment of cruelty had inadvertently created lasting change. Powell's golf fundraiser continued, but under new oversight, ensuring funds were distributed equitably. His networking abilities were channeled into legitimate benefit for all students, not just those whose parents could reciprocate favors. The events raised less money but served more students. Madison's gap year community service included cleaning duties at the same youth center where she'd once mocked custodial staff. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Madison herself. She worked quietly, her designer clothes replaced by practical uniforms. The security cameras that had mysteriously malfunctioned during Madison's worst behavior were replaced with a system that uploaded directly to district servers. Mr. Chen supervised the installation personally, ensuring no principal could control the narrative through selective footage again. Sarah Powell joined a support group for parents of troubled teens, finally acknowledging what she'd spent years denying. Her charity work shifted focus from galas to genuine service. The transformation seemed authentic, born from genuine recognition of her enabling role. Student behavior referrals showed a marked shift in patterns. Minor infractions by all students received consistent consequences while serious behaviors faced appropriate escalation. The favoritism that had poisoned school culture was systematically eliminated. Powell learned to separate his dual roles through intensive coaching. His love for Madison no longer translated into professional protection. The boundaries were difficult but necessary, creating healthier dynamics for everyone involved. The evaluation's ripple effects extended beyond the school. Other principals in the district proactively reviewed their own practices, not wanting to face similar scrutiny. The threat of accountability proved more powerful than actual oversight. Madison's therapy revealed deeper issues than simple entitlement. Years of protection had stunted her emotional development and social skills. The work was difficult, but she was finally facing consequences that couldn't be negotiated away. Williams received a District Excellence Award for her courage in documenting problems. The recognition came with a monetary bonus and expanded responsibilities in the new accountability system. Her vindication was complete but bittersweet. The school's reputation gradually improved as word spread about the reforms. New families who'd avoided the district began enrolling, trusting that their children would be protected from unchecked bullying. Enrollment numbers reflected renewed community faith. Powell's evaluation file remained active for 3 years of probationary oversight. Each review showed incremental improvement in his judgment and decision-making. He would never regain full autonomy, but he was learning to work within appropriate constraints. Madison's college acceptance was officially deferred pending completion of gap year requirements. The university's admissions office would reevaluate based on demonstrated growth rather than her father's influence. Her future finally depended on her own actions. The structural changes implemented after my evaluation became known as the Xiao protocols throughout the state. The systematic approach to addressing enabled misconduct through documentation and graduated consequences provided a replicable model. Real change happened incrementally when systems finally stopped enabling harmful behavior and started demanding better from those with privilege and power. Thanks for reading this story with me. I hope you have a wonderful day. See you next time.